with regards to gay marriage, I told you that's what I would amend the Constitution. Contraception, it's working just fine. Just leave it alone.
Governor?
George.
I understand that, but you've given two answers to the question. Do you believe that the Supreme Court should overturn it or not?
Do I believe the Supreme Court should overturn? Do I believe Supreme Court should overturn Roe v. Wade? Yes, I do.
He mentioned my name.
Go ahead,
I didn't know whether I got time when it was favorable or not, but thank you. No, I think the Fourth Amendment is very clear. It's explicit in our privacy. You can't go into anybody's house and look at what they have or their papers or any private things without a search warrant. This is why the Patriot Act is wrong, because you have a right of privacy by the Fourth Amendment. As far as selling contraceptives, the Interstate Commerce Clause protects this because the Interstate Commerce Clause was originally written not to impede trade between the states, but it was written to facilitate trade between the states. So if it's not illegal to import birth control pills from one state to the next, it would be legal to sell birth control pills in that state.
Senator Santorum?
What's the question?
The question. Governor Paul, Congressman Paul, let me bring this to you. You're running here in the Republican primary, but you haven't promised to support the party's nominee in November, and you refuse to rule out running as a third-party candidate if you fail to get the nomination. Why not rule that out?
Well, I essentially have. It's just that I don't like absolutes, like I will never do something. But no.
Never vote for a debt ceiling.
Please don't interrupt me. So I have said it in the last go-around. I said they asked me that about 30 times. I think maybe you've asked me 4 or 5 already. And the answer is always the same. You know, no, I have no plans to do it. I don't intend to do it. And somebody pushed me a little bit harder, and they said, why don't you plan to do it? I says, I don't want to. So I have no intention. But I don't know why a person can't reserve a judgment and see how things turn out. You know, in many ways, I see the other candidates as very honorable people, but I sometimes disagree with their approach to government, and I'd like to see some changes. I want to see changes where they're talking about a little bit of a difference in foreign policy, an interest in the Federal Reserve, a change in the monetary policy. We haven't heard one minute of talk about cutting any spending. This talk previously about cutting the military spending. That's cutting proposed increases. This is why I have proposed that we cut a whole $1 trillion the first year. If we're serious as Republicans and conservatives, we have to cut. So I want to put as much pressure on them as I can. But besides, I'm doing pretty well. You know, third wasn't too bad. I wasn't too far behind it. Doing pretty well. Catching up on Mitt every single day.
Well, I want to give Congressman Paul a chance to weigh in here because foreign policy is something that a lot of people think is your Achilles heel when it comes to getting elected. You've said that you wouldn't have authorized the raid to get Osama bin Laden. You think that a nuclear Iran is really none of our business. How do you reconcile that when part of your job as president would be to
I think that's a misquote. I don't want Iran to get a nuclear weapon. I voted to go after bin Laden, so that, you know, takes care of that. But, you know, this business about when to go in, I don't think it's that complicated. I think we've made it much more complicated than it should be. Yes, the president is the commander-in-chief, but he's not the king. And that's why we fought a revolution, not to have a king and decide when we go to war. We would have saved ourselves a lot of grief if we only had gone to war in a proper manner. And the proper manner is the people elect congressmen and senators to make a declaration of war, and then we become the commander-in-chief and we make these decisions. But we went into Afghanistan, we went into Iraq, and now we're in Pakistan. We're involved in so many countries now. They want to move on to Syria, and they can't. There's some in Washington now can't wait till they start bombing Iran. We have to change this whole nature. You know, something happened this week I thought was so encouraging, and it reminds me of how we finally talked to the Chinese. I mean, they had killed 100 million of their own people, but we finally broke the ice by playing ping pong. But today, the American Navy picked up a bunch of fishermen, Iranian fishermen, that had been held by the pirates and released them. And they were so welcome. It was just a wonderful thing to happen. This is the kind of stuff we should deal with, not putting on sanctions. Sanctions themselves always leads up to war, and that's what we're doing. Eastern Europe is going to be destabilized if they don't have this oil, and this just pushes Iran right into the hands of the Chinese. So our policy may be well-intended, but it has a lot of downside, a lot of unintended consequences, and unfortunately, blowback.